Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. It's 2 o'clock. We'll give people just 1 extra minute to log in. You know what it's like sometimes. You go to log into Teams and it plays up and it just takes you a bit longer than you expected. And then we'll get cracking and get started. While people are logging in, I just want to give my personal and heartfelt thank you to you, our customers. It's a small organisation, iAbacus and Opius. So your business really does make a difference to us. Hopefully you'll find the webinar today really beneficial, interesting, hopefully. We did a similar session this morning with schools who weren't customers, and the feedback so far has been incredibly positive. So being as you're already iAbacus users, hopefully it'll be just as positive. So it's 1 minute past 2. I thought I'd just tell you a bit about this session. Firstly, we're going to look at the report card structure and the toolkit. I find the toolkit slightly more interesting, if I'm honest, but we'll come to that, and how that affects a school's SEF and SIP. And then we'll look at how iAbacus is already tailored to the toolkit and will be in the future, of course. And then also, if you represent a multi-academy trust or a federation or a network of schools, how using iAbacus can really streamline your work for creating dashboards. And I say dashboards with a difference, because I hate the term dashboards, because I see loads of data and pie charts and bar charts, but something quite different. So we've got I've got a PowerPoint. It's more of a web page, actually. It's nice sometimes to visualize the things as we're talking about them, so it's not really your usual PowerPoint with loads of bullet points on. And we will actually look at questions and answers and any feedback at the end of the session. So I'll get started because I've put it as half an hour, and try not to go over that, but if we've got loads of questions we might just well do that. So let me share my screen and make sure that you can see my browser. Okay, so I'm logged into iAbacus, but we're going to come back to that. So let's talk about the report card and the toolkit. I approached this with a bit of trepidation, if I'm honest, because of the dialogue and the feedback that's happening in the press at the moment. But as soon as the toolkit was released, I was keen to look at it, probably like you. And obviously the attention around the report card and the inspection process, that's one thing. And I kind of want to separate that a little bit and really focus on the toolkit. Okay, because this is where I think the value is for schools at the moment to start aligning their self-evaluation and their improvement planning. I thought it was quite funny that they called it a toolkit, if I'm honest. And that's why I've put the question mark next to toolkit, because I don't know, when someone says toolkit, what do you think of? I think of multiple things like resources and videos, guides and tips. And actually, when I opened up the toolkit, what I got was criteria, a rubric, a bit like the old grade descriptors. But saying that, this I think is where there is some real value, because the toolkit is ultra clear. It has detail at every level. I don't think actually it's going to change that much. And we'll come to that in a moment. So what are the main differences? And the toolkit reveals this. I mean, the report card does as well, because obviously the report card has the numbers of levels, the 5 levels in the different areas. So let's have a look at some of the detail in here. Well, first of all, the language they use in some of the videos and some of the feedback is that it's got more granular. Okay. And you can tell that when you look at some of the new areas, because essentially what they've done is taken something like quality of education and broken it down into curriculum, developing, teaching and achievement. Okay, so in essence, when you first look at the toolkit, you might think, oh wow, this looks like a lot more work, but actually you were probably breaking those things down and evidencing them and diagnosing them inside quality of education. And all we really want to be able to do now is to kind of do it at that more detailed level. But I don't believe, if you're tackling self-evaluation in a thorough way that you will be doing, that it means more work. And we'll see that in iAbacus in a moment. So that's one way that it's become more granular. The other way is that some things are now kind of drawn to the forefront, attendance and inclusion. They're kind of two ones that I can immediately see because we've got new areas for them. Something like well-being is now attached in the pupil's personal development. And we'd expect it to be, wouldn't we? Because learners' well-being, it's of prime importance. I noticed earlier as well that leadership and governance rather than leadership and management. So some small tweaks and then some kind of separating out to draw attention to certain aspects of provision. So what does that mean? Well, it means we've got more granular areas. We've got 5 levels. Okay, so we're used to 4 levels. Interestingly, when you look at the grade descriptor or the toolkit for exemplary, it tells us really that this is going to, anything that's been judged or evaluated as exemplary has to go to an external body for validation. So it'll be interesting to see that how that pans out. It might be that in the adjustment as far as the consultation goes, that exemplary is removed to kind of reduce complexity. We'll have to wait and see. I mean, on that line, it is very hard to gauge where things are heading conclusively. But when you read between the lines, and sometimes that's about reading the letters that are going back and forth at the moment between chief inspector, government, the DFE. When you look at the letters, there's some kind of essence of sticking to it. Okay, because this letter was from the 11th of June. And my reading of it is that there's a certain justification towards the report card format. Okay, because what Martin Oliver is doing is saying, okay, well, parents want this, and this YouGov survey kind of shows massive percentages of backing for it. So there's an almost justification of keeping it as it is. So we'll have to see how that pans out. But what I did think was interesting was this comment on the toolkit. Doesn't say the toolkit's going to be modified greatly, but it does say that they will clearly define grades and boundaries, which is good. I mean, it's fairly clear at the moment, and more transparency and more clarity around the levels will only help schools self-evaluate, will help them look at what they're doing with a view to doing it better, and that's what we want. So in summary, we've got the toolkit. I think it's quite valuable. I think it's quite helpful. There's a whole set of issues around inspection and the report cards and the processes, so we're not going to get into those. But what I do want to do is work with you now to show you how iAbacus is aligned already, and it always was. And the reason it is because it's principle based. Before I just talk about that final slide, I did search for self-evaluation and improvement planning in the whole of the toolkit, and those phrases don't appear. But what it does do is highlight the importance, and we know this, the importance of leaders having a really good grasp and a really good understanding of a school's strengths and weaknesses. It says an astute understanding, and also this establishing a culture for continuous improvement, which are at the heart of iAbacus. That's what iAbacus is all about. So let me just stop the share for the moment and we'll come back into that. So it's important to understand, and as customers, I'm sure you already recognize this, that iAbacus is based on a model and it's completely universal. So we have schools that apply this in Scotland to the How Good Is Our School framework, in Ireland, in Wales to the ESTIM framework. So in England, it's always been a relevant tool. We had it for the Ofsted framework, we had it for the CIF, the EIF, and of course now it's going to be mapped to the toolkit. And that's because it's a universal process. You can apply it anywhere. And actually, when we have a look at how it works with the new toolkit, I think it applies brilliantly. So I'll share my browser and we'll log into iAbacus. And what I'll do is show you the new template, where it's at, okay, how it might be adjusted in the future, but I don't believe it will be massively, and we'll go from there. So let me log into iAbacus. So in iAbacus at the moment, if you go to new Abacus and drop down the list of templates, you'll see that we've got all of the different school templates, ones for staff personal development, for subject leaders, for different themes like attendance. Just as an aside note, this attendance template is brilliant if that's one of your priorities, because it's mapped to the the EEF review toolkit, the behaviour ones mapped to the DFE guidance, some fantastic themed templates. But of course, the one that you're going to be interested in is up here, and it's the new Ofsted framework. Okay, so you'll dive into that, and as soon as you click continue, you'll get the new template. Okay, so what do we notice about this? First of all, the number of levels down the left. As we've already looked at the toolkit, we can see that we've got things like attendance and inclusion. Levels across the top, we've got a greater number of levels. Incidentally, iAbacus just adapts to the number of levels. In Scotland, I think they've got 6. Okay, so however the structure of the abacus, we can accommodate it. Also, it's important to mention that it is customizable. A lot of our schools, they use the templates as is, but hopefully you've seen that you can already customize any template that's already in there, and it's simply a case of clicking customize. So as soon as you do that, everything becomes editable. Okay, so in your abacus, you might say, actually, we don't have sixth form, we're not analysing early years, and at the moment, we're not going to use iAbacus to focus on achievement because we do that differently in our MIS or another tool. So don't be afraid of customising iAbacus down to either focus on core factors that you want to look at, or indeed expand it. We've got a lot of schools and trusts that embed the core Ofsted areas, but then have their own trust focus areas or their own academy values. So don't be afraid of clicking add area and then putting something that's vitally important to you, whether it's reading in your school or something very specific. You can add it in and it will become one of those things down the left hand side. It could be in your school that causing concern, this lowest level, is not something that you're going to be evaluating against. That would be a nice position to be in. So take it out if you don't want it. Okay, all I'm doing really here is just showing you that we're going to start with something that's mapped to an agreed framework, Toolkit, but then we can tailor it. Okay, so straight away I've dropped it down to 4 areas. I've added reading and took off some of the others. And it would work in exactly the same way as any abacus. You'd pick up that bead and you'd slide it to make that initial judgment about where you're at or where your school is at. Okay, so what I will do at this stage is I'll just dive into an abacus that I created yesterday, and it's exactly the same as what we've just been looking at, but I put some beads on it already and we've loaded some content into there, some responses. Okay, because the iAbacus comes with content, it's got all of the criteria in it already. So as you know, you slide the bead and then you go into the criteria. So let's do that and then just see what we get. Okay. Well, fairly obviously, we get the toolkit. Okay, and what we've been working on is laying this out in a way that it looks just like the toolkit PDF. Okay, we want some real consistency here so that when you make a judgment in iAbacus and you start to validate that judgment and you know that you're using the toolkit, it looks and feels like the toolkit. So maybe you've said in your initial judgment, or maybe your colleagues are working on this, that leadership and governance is strong. You've got the strong criteria here from the toolkit. Okay, and as you move the bead, the criteria doesn't change, but just the position of the bead obviously just shows which level has been highlighted. Okay, and what is nice about iAbacus is you've got this kind of variation within the judgment. So top end of secure bordering on strong, or even maybe top end of strong bordering on this elusive exemplary level. So you can see the toolkit is built directly into the criteria, and that means that when you or your colleagues are making judgments, you can pull that straight in and use that to help. I also think actually criteria can be very useful when you're considering your evidence. Okay, because you'll be typing your evidence into here, or your colleagues will, and hyperlinking off to any folders of evidence or files containing evidence. Sometimes you want to know what evidence to be looking for. Well, of course, if you go back to the criteria, you can not only look at what is the sound judgment. Secure. I'm getting the phraseology already wrong. It's because I work with a lot of different countries on abacuses. You can only look at what's strong, maybe where you've judged yourself. But you can also look back at secure, which is this kind of really meaty set of statements down the middle. And that's going to help you finalize what evidence you want to use in your abacus to justify that judgment. Okay, so usual process, evidence, signposting your evidence, and then it's a universal process, so nothing really changes. You're able to analyze your helping and hindering factors. Okay, so you can enter them in here. Hopefully you've seen that you can also prioritize these and move these around. Your hindering factors, remember, don't be afraid of negative language. If something's lack of, insufficient, overly complex, then say it is, because that's where your action plan is going to be really easy then, because you're going to be tackling those negative factors or those hindering factors in your action planning. Okay. Another little tip while we're here, grey out the things that aren't your priorities. Okay. So when you're doing the diagnostic, especially with the Ofsted toolkit, it's going to bring up a lot of things where you might say, actually, this is going really well. Okay, this is a helping factor, but this is something we're really struggling with at the moment. Put them all in, okay, as many as you can, because that's going to show a high level of awareness. It's going to be a really good diagnostic. But when it comes to your action planning, grey some of them out, okay, because then they're removed from the action plan. Okay, let's have a look at the action plan. Okay, a lot of the time, you as a school will be using your abacus as a live snapshot. Okay, the bead positions are showing where you're at. Okay, but of course, if you want to use this to inform stakeholders, trustees, trust boards, inspectors, you may want to export this as a PDF document. So up here, export PDF, you know this already, but I just want to show you what this report will look like. It's obviously going to have the abacus on it, and then it's going to have the detailed evidence analysis and action planning for each of the areas. Okay. Right. Sometimes schools use iAbacus for whole school self-evaluation and improvement planning, and they have an abacus like this. Okay. Sometimes you want to be able to work with middle leaders or subject leaders and have them evaluate their area of provision using common criteria. Well, I think we're getting to the point now where the establishment of the toolkit means we've got a central agreed criteria, and we actually want to start and help our middle leaders to understand the language, to get that kind of culture of continuous improvement and self-evaluation. So in a moment, we're going to look at how you could create a subject abacus, a subject leader abacus using the toolkit. Before I do that, I just wanted to re-clarify how you can demonstrate progress with your abacus. If in your initial cycle of self-evaluation, everything is at this secure level, but you're reaching out to be strong, and you think that actually 6 months down the line, you've embedded some of those actions, they're now starting to show impact, don't forget that you can pick up a bead and actually drag a new bead on the same row and just demonstrate your growth and your improvement. It'll know you've made a new judgment. It will let you copy across everything, and then you can just click continue, and what you've got is a new bead showing improvement and showing that movement towards exemplary. So hopefully that's going to help you to just track your journey and your continuous improvement, and also demonstrate it. We get feedback saying that actually sometimes that's quite hard to do when you're doing a paper-based self-evaluation and a file-based school improvement plan, but with an abacus, it's part of the core process. So we've got the toolkit embedded in for whole school self-evaluation. How could you use it with subject leaders? Okay, well, one way would be to start a new abacus, base it on the toolkit, and then, as we did earlier, customize it to suit what might be your areas of focus for your subject leaders. Okay, so what you can do, you can customize it and say, actually, we're going to be looking at and focus on your areas, leadership, maybe curriculum and developing teaching. Take out some of the things that are more cross-school aspects. I'm going to leave personal development in there. I'm going to take out these two. I'll probably take out causing concern. Actually, no, I'm going to leave it in because it could be something. It could be at that low level. So you can see that I've prioritized it. Okay, what we could do then is call this our subject self-evaluation. Okay, and we could ask our subject leaders to complete this abacus as part of their work. Okay, but looking at subject level provision. If you do this, some schools we work with, they do this before the school self-evaluation. So they empower their subject leaders. They glean a lot of insight because they say, okay, well, where do you think we are? And obviously those bead positions are going to be varied. Some are going to be in attention needed maybe, and some might even be an exemplary. But what that will do is when you come to do the school self-evaluation, you've got an evidence base already to start drawing from. And if someone challenges your school in regards to how you are embedding a culture of continuous improvement, which is a phrase in the new toolkit, you can show them that your overall school improvement plan was not a kind of top down, two people did it, closed kind of environment, but actually in a 360 stroke survey approach, you actually got input from your colleagues and then used it to inform your judgments. So that's one way of using an abacus. And incidentally, the way that you would do that, you deploy that as a template, and that's something that we can create for you or create with you. That's part of the service that's included. And then, much like a multi-academy trust would overlay multiple abacuses, you'd do the same at school level. So at the moment, these are all different academies, but actually there could be subject areas. And all you'll do is overlay them. I have to select them first, overlay them, and then you're going to be gleaning the insights from across those different subject areas. In fact, I'm not so sure that I didn't actually mock this up somewhere. Maybe not. Okay, but what I will show you is a similar approach where you have an abacus for something particular. So did you notice in the toolkit, personal development and well-being? Okay, it's been in the EIF for a while, but just as personal development. But now it's personal development and well-being. And if you know our work with SMSC and British values, you know that's kind of an area of our focus. So we thought, why not make an abacus for a particular area of focus? Could be inclusion, could be attendance or behaviour or safeguarding, whatever it is. Okay, and then have one central abacus with criteria that's based on the toolkit, so it's nationally agreed current criteria, and then just ask subject leaders or key stage coordinators to drag a bead to where they think provision is at. Okay, so you can see down the left hand side, if you're familiar with iAbacus, normally we put kind of different areas of provision here, but what we're going to do is just put the subjects down the left. So this is a central abacus. We simply invite every middle leader or head of subject, department lead, and we say, right, slide the bead. And actually, we've been delivering these in inset sessions, and within about half an hour, much like we have done today, kind of similar timescales, probably even less than that, we've got middle leaders self-evaluating their subject area, looking at the criteria, thinking about their evidence, analysing what's helping and hindering, and putting together stepped actions to kind of contribute to what is a whole school priority. And this priority can be anything within your school. So I'd give these collaborative abacuses a real consideration. If you look at the criteria, okay, what we've done here is pull out the key questions and prompts for reflection. So these are basically from the EIF, but just kind of drawn out by subject leaders. And then the subject leader just makes a judgment and then follows on with exactly the same process that you're using at school level, and maybe even they're using at their professional development level, should they be analysing their own performance. So just to recap, we've got the toolkit, good set of criteria. It's already in iAbacus. It may not be adjusted that much in the near future. I've got a document that we've been working on that I can send to you should you want me to, and it's a bit lengthy, it's 15 pages, but it's a document that really analyzes the EIF, analyzes the toolkit, and just maps pathways between the two. I mean, some of it we covered earlier when we looked at that granular approach to what was quality of education and how that's being broken down. But when you look at this document, it's quite detailed, and it just shows you how certain EIF judgment areas map and are shifted into the toolkit. Okay, I don't think it's that complicated. It's a detailed document, but when you get the gist of where it's going, I think it will be quite easy to take in a current SEF, SIP, school improvement plan, and migrate it across, especially if you're using iAbacus. This document is neutral from iAbacus, so it's talking to schools that might be doing it in a traditional way. Okay, we've got 5 minutes for questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Let's have a look. We've got a Q&A section within Teams and a chat section. I'm happy for you to use either or raise your hand. That's the one I'm least familiar with. So feel free to use any of those. I'll try and preempt any questions if we don't get any. One of the questions that's cropped up in the past, can we start using the Toolkit template now? Okay, and that's because some schools in their cycle of self-evaluation need to start doing it now. My answer to that question is actually, I think it's yes. Okay, and the reason being, the indications that you get from the letters that are going back and forth at the moment is that there are going to be tweaks. Okay, I don't think they're suddenly going to go from 10 areas back down to 4. They might drop, but they might combine some. Okay, and that would be a regression back to something similar to where they were. I don't think they're going to change necessarily the level, but even if they do, the criteria that you'd be using now isn't suddenly going to go out of date. It's just well-informed, well-considered criteria. And actually, if it does change, then you just change the criteria in the Abacus and it would work perfectly well. So I've got a question about adding more helping and hindering responses, I think, because you can add more helping and hindering factors. On the roadmap for updates this year, so this academic year, is the ability to add sub-actions, which I think is really what we're talking about here, is about saying we've got a hindering factor. It's a priority thing we need to work on, but there's a series of actions, and sometimes they're different people for different actions. So that is in the roadmap. To be honest, I don't think we're going to get it finished before September. So it's looking at having that in place for next academic year. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that in the tool, what you can do is be more, and I hate to use this word because it's like a word we're going to overuse today, granular about the hindering factors. So if I'm in iAbacus here, and I'll very quickly just make a new Abacus, and I make a judgment about developing teaching, and I say that it's, in fact, let me say that it's actually just into secure. In the analysis here, and you're looking at hindering factors, I guess what you can do, and interestingly, when we launched iAbacus, I thought maybe 5 or 10 would be enough hindering factors, and actually schools came back and wanted more. So you can actually extend this to quite a number of hindering factors, and it may be that actually if you had hindering factors about differentiation or some lesson observations, what you could do is kind of have them first one and then maybe your second hindering factor, and therefore if lesson observations was a focus issue, you'd have your number of hindering factors, and then all of those you'd be able to plan against in your action planning. So just here, for example, you could expand that. What are you going to do about this aspect? What are you going to do about this? And you would build up quite a detailed action plan. I don't know if that's helpful. It's just about using the tools that you've got there in a more simple way. But that would allow you to add multiple actions to a common themed hindering factor here. Let's have a look. Any more questions? No. We've got a couple of minutes left. Okay, well, thank you very much for your attendance today. If you have got any questions or you want a one-to-one demonstration, walkthrough, Q&A session, please feel free to ask it. What I'll do is just bring that up on screen. You've probably got my login details, one of my login details, you've probably got my contact details already. But just in case, what I'll do is I'll just go to this end screen. You can request a meeting at any time. iabacus.com/meet. It can be on Teams, Google Meet, Zoom, and we can go through how we might be able to help you translate what you've already got into that new toolkit, or kind of take a fresh approach and get you using it. So hopefully you found that beneficial. There will be a recording of this that will go out, so feel free to share that with colleagues if they weren't over attending.